Hello, my name is Dr. Gibson, and today we're going to talk about power and approach. If you have any questions about today's content, feel free to reach out at asha@blackstar.net. Let's begin.
By the end of this lesson, you should be able to understand approach avoidance theory, understand personal sense of power, understand BATNA, understand key findings and research on approach behaviors in negotiation, understand socioeconomic status and its relationship to power, and understand real-world applications. According to the approach avoidance theory, individuals with higher sense of power are more likely to approach rewards than those who have a lower sense of power. This pattern of response has been found consistently across demographic groups. Having a psychological sense of power triggers the behavior system associated with approach that sets into motion goal-directed behavior. Having power also suppresses the behavioral system associated with inhibition, which seeks to avoid threats and punishment. This finding carries implications for those who have been traditionally in low positions of power and authority, such as women and racial ethnic minority members. The nature of negotiation and conflict situations are largely dictated by how important the relationship is, whether or not the goals of the parties are competing or compatible, and the relative power dynamic between the two parties. As such, power has, and will continue to be, a key mechanism driving behavior. While the classical definition of power refers to the ability to give or take something that has value, personal sense of power refers to the psychological state that occurs when individuals believe they can influence others' actions, thoughts, or motives, and has been found to be relatively stable across situations. Studies show that individuals who have a higher sense of power are more likely to initiate negotiations in organizational contexts than individuals who have a lower sense of power. Studies across the organizational sciences show that possessing power increases approach behavior and limits inhibition behavior. According to approach avoidance theory, higher power triggers the behavioral approach system that increases goal-directed conduct. It also suppresses the behavioral inhibition system that seeks to avoid punishment and threats. Further, people with high personal sense of power are more likely to feel positive emotions such as enthusiasm and excitement, which facilitates approach behaviors, and less likely to feel negative emotions. A higher sense of power is also related with greater voice behavior in the workplace and proactive behavior. This study found that employees that felt powerless were more likely to remain silent than workers who possessed a greater sense of power. Taken together, these studies show the influential nature of power on not only behavior, but emotions as well. Bargaining power stems from having attractive best alternatives to a negotiated agreement and asymmetrical control over resources and decision making. Whereas the bulk of studies in negotiation assume equal power among party members, power is usually relative. In most salary negotiations, power is assumed to be asymmetrical, with more power residing with the employer than with the employee. However, despite the formal designation of low power, some individuals are likely to maintain a semblance of power due to high BATNAs, a state-coined personal sense of power in the social science literature. Distinct from autonomy, sense of power is an abstraction that can only be understood vis-a-vis others, that is, in relationship to others. Personal sense of power is a highly relational term that is socially constructed. Prior studies show that having a high sense of personal power can produce the same effects as having access to resources or objective bases of power, such as having an authority position in a formalized hierarchy. Thus, the psychological state of feeling powerful can mimic traditional representations of power and the resulting outcomes from that state. In another study on personal power, researchers found that those who had higher levels of power were more inclined to take risk and more optimistic about the chances that they took. Further, in an investigation on the psychological effects of power, Anderson and colleagues showed that individuals with high levels of power were more likely to ascribe to an internal locus of control than their low power counterparts. In addition to having a higher internal locus of control, this study also found that having a higher sense of power was negatively correlated with vulnerability to stress. Given this, it's likely that sense of power can buffer the negative outcomes brought on by anxiety during distributive bargaining tasks, such as the salary negotiation process. Research suggests that individuals who have low power are more in tune with situational cues than their high power counterparts. Power also decreases perception of threat. Therefore, it is likely that individuals who have low sense of power may be more impacted by a stereotype threat than their high sense of power counterparts. Paying attention to situational cues, such as the level of gender and racial ethnic based stereotypes in the air, reduces executive functioning. As a result, less resources are available for the task at hand, which can impact performance. Research shows that power is not always explicit and can manifest itself in multiple ways in organizational settings that are not always apparent to the naked eye. Background characteristics, such as having parents who went to college, access to higher education, or generational wealth, can serve as helpful bargaining chips in a wide range of tasks associated with approaching rewards. As such, these factors can induce a situational sense of power that gives the actor access to similar benefits of power in the explicit sense described previously. Indeed, the study of socioeconomic status, which includes markers of privilege, has consistently shown a positive association between class and approach orientations. Social economic status, which can be described as differences in wealth, education, occupation, and status, can influence one's sense of power or psychological mindset of feeling powerful. Social economic status can also have an impact on willingness to engage in negotiations. In socio-cultural systems, such as organizations, social class may offer access to certain material resources, cultural capital, and upward mobility, which can have an impact on affect, cognition, and behavior. What are the key takeaways? First, power comes in many shapes and sizes. Personal sense of power is relatively stable across negotiation situations. Power stems from having alternative options. Power increases approach towards rewards and greater levels of positive emotions. Those in low power are more likely to be in tune with situational cues than high power counterparts. Class can also serve as a predictor of approach behavior. Thank you for joining me today as we learned about power and approach. Again, if you have any questions about this content, feel free to reach out at asha@blackstar.net. Thank you, and we'll talk soon.